Καλησπέρα, σας καλωσορίζουμε στην Ταινιοθήκη. Έχουμε τη μεγάλη χαρά απόψε να έχουμε μαζί μας τον Βασίλη Βούρηκα που θα μας εισάγει τον Athens Kaganov, τον πολύ σημαντικό καλλιτέχνη από την Νότια Αφρική. Και δίνω αμέσως τον λόγο στον Βασίλη να σας πει δύο λόγια για το έργο του.
So let's welcome Athens Kaganov.
Welcome.
Well, καλησπέρα, καλώς ήρθατε. Σας ευχαριστούμε που ήρθατε απόψε στην προβολή των ταινιών του Aryan. Είναι η πρώτη φορά που θα δούμε ταινίες του Athens Kaganov στην Ελλάδα. So, I just said that this is the first time we will see your films in Greece, that's right, no? And I wanted to say only one thing. There is 4 films in this program. They cannot be descriptive enough of the very long and prolific oeuvre of Aryan. And as I was not sure that Aryan will be here, I didn't include several films, or some films that I would have had I known that he will be here for sure, because we could secure that early on. But I added a film with his permission, and with your permission, after the end of this program, which is only 70 minutes long, we will show one more film. It's 7 minutes long, and as far as I know, it's a well-done international premiere. It's been shown once in South Africa. It's very new, but it does have a kind of explicit content, which is present in some of Aryan's work. So if you think you might be disturbed by that, I recommend that you go after the first 4 films out for 7 minutes, and you can always return for the Q&A. But I recommend that you stay.
Thank you very much for being here, everybody. I really appreciate seeing you. I just want to thank the festival for inviting me, which is a great honor. And especially Vasily, who I met in the Oberhausen Film Festival earlier this year. But I don't know if you know the expression to save somebody's ass. Do you know that expression? How would you translate it in Greece?
I don't know.
If you say you save someone's ass. Today Vasily literally saved my ass because my trousers... Yeah. And I only have one pair of trousers, so I'm wearing Vasily's trousers. So thank you very much, Vasily, for saving my ass.
Okay, εξήγησε το παντελόνι του, μου είπα να τα πω και στα ελληνικά και μας ευχαριστεί που του σώσαμε τον κόλλο. Μεγάλη προβολή. Okay, well, thanks for staying. Please, let's welcome Aryan back to the stage. I don't know how long we have. I have a lot of questions, but I can always ask them later. I would rather do something I don't normally do, like ask you to ask questions directly. I'm sure somebody might have something to ask. But just wait for it.
I thought I'd break the silence. Great work, congratulations. Just 2 questions. The song for Hector, a little bit about who Hector was and what was the story. And the second question is in the Trinity for the victims of Mαρικάνα, the narrator, the voiceover at the beginning, well, it lasted for quite a bit. Who is speaking and whose words are they?
Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you all for staying. It's a great honor, and thank you again, Vasily, for saving my ass. Appreciate that. Hector Peterson was a boy of 12 in 1976 who was shot in the very famous iconic image of the Soweto riots. He is the boy being carried. He was one of the first boys killed by the police. And in that year, I was also 12 years old, so I always felt very deeply connected to Hector Peterson. He was also born in 1964, and he would have been 50 today. So his ass was not saved by anybody. And in the Trinity for the victims of Mαρικάνα, the text was written by Jesus Sepulveda, an anarchist poet, and it's spoken in the Setswana language by Lefifi Tlhabi, a South African poet.
Any other questions? Okay, well, first of all, I don't want to ask you something. I just want to inform on something. Unfortunately, there was not room in the catalogue of this festival for me to elaborate on anything. There's nothing. So I'm really proud. It's just like a very important moment for me as a programmer to be able to have Aryani Kaganov here. And because for me, the work that you've seen is not just the work. It is Aryan who, for me, is the work, his life, the way that he's worked all these years, and how his films have reached or not reached us over the years. The fact that the works are not shown much is not something that I would like to self-congratulate us, or myself and you, for being here and being part of. It's a pity. But what I want to congratulate him for is that, he's not, all these years that I follow cinema, I have not known of Aryani Kaganov, and I think that has something to do with Aryani Kaganov not following this kind of route that other people follow. And this, I know it may sound difficult to understand, but this does make the work different for me. Would you like to say something about the way that you show your work, about how you have pursued showing your work and why, although you have made so much, and although everything that I've seen is so different, so much more, so many films, features, like you have to see SMS, Sugarman, you can find it, see it, and so many other films. The other day, 3 months ago, you were at Oberhausen Festival, you got an honorary mention for this film. 1 month later, you sent me a film which I consider one of the most important films of this year, with not so important, but voiceover in German by Blixen Bargeld. I mean, how do you get to make so much work? Who pays for it? Who shows it? How do you do it?
This is all top secret. You make me very shy, Vasily. Thank you, it's very nice of you, but there wasn't really a question there. So I'm going to ask if there's anyone in the audience who has a question, because I cannot answer those questions.
No, the only question is, is there a way, behind your way of approaching exhibition of your work, is there a thinking behind it, or is it something that just happened? I knew things like this will happen.
I think I would describe myself as a shithead. I shit the films out, as a kind of organic process. I don't think so much about them. They're very intuitive, and I don't waste time with producers and distributors, because that just kills you, So I tend to work in solitary confinement, and so it's nice to have an audience. It's really delightful, but I always felt the most important thing was not to waste time with the politics of distribution, and especially producers. They can kill you, and broadcasters. These people are a kind of lice. They're a kind of vermin that infest cinema. They're very, very dangerous, and they determine what people do. They form. And I saw this when I was living in Holland. I lived in Holland for many years, and I just saw all these people who were at the film academy with me, young Dutch people. I came from South Africa. I was in exile, so I could see that these people were being ruined by the system of subsidies and film festivals and markets. The markets are the worst things, you all these young talented artists, and they all line up at these markets to beg for money from these broadcasters. I was like, come on, I'm a shithead, I don't do that, I shit. So for me, the making of films is an organic process, just like eating and shitting. It's part of my life. It's not something that I have to ask permission for to anybody. And if the films don't get seen, then so be it. It's more important for me to make them than to beg people to like them. But I do appreciate that you stayed. Thank you.
So this is another question. Okay, should I continue? Because for me, I wanted to tell you, we discussed it before. I don't have much expectation of activist cinema. Of cinema that sort of discusses one-to-one a specific political situation and paints it realistically on the screen. Yet, particularly in Mαρικάνα, which is very informative, we didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about the massacre there. I find that you managed to do that in a way that is sensational, it attacks the senses, but at the same time is very sensitive. And throughout the program today, with not necessarily the exception, but like differently in Amen, all the films were in one way or another like political films, political body, politics, direct politics. And I want to ask you, also for the last film that you showed me recently, which I hope we will be able to show here too, what is your position when you make films with regards to specific politics or to politics, which are more abstract, about art and about, cinema?
Well, thank you very much for your question. It's very hard to say no to Vasily because he's so enthusiastic and he brought me here, but it's very difficult to talk about myself. I'm a very shy person. So all I can say to you, answer you, is that when I was a younger man, I was very influenced by the philosophy of Georges Bataille, and especially the notion of sovereignty, of being a sovereign in your own life. And I thought that was very important for me because the slave politics and the slave morality of the world never appealed to me. And coming from South Africa, I was conscripted to go into the army, but I refused to go, so I went to Europe. And what I saw in Europe was not healthy. So I went back to South Africa where it's in crisis again. And as I've gotten older, I've seen there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to flee. And the only place you can operate from, the only politics are the politics of sovereignty, of actually operating as a sovereign being, trying to have total autonomy and respecting each individual that you meet as a sovereign and as an autonomous unit. And this is not the way of the world today. I mean, we live in a time of ruthless denial of our sovereignty as individuals and as humans. So these are very, very bad times we live in. Vasily was telling me today about the crisis in Greece. Let me tell you, the crisis is everywhere I go, everywhere I see this crisis. And there might be a specific texture to the crisis in Greece, which you perceive as a Greek thing, but it's not. It's everywhere. There's nowhere. Hong Kong, Tokyo, New York, it's all in crisis. It's all a disaster.
Anybody else?
I would like a comment from you about this juxtaposition you use of beautiful music and beautiful melodies and beautiful musicians against very important archival footage where really severe historical moments are being documented. And I would like to hear your views about why you choose this way of commenting on the image by using music.
Well, firstly, thank you for your question. It's always good to get questions that are difficult, I think. That's the best kind of question. I would not like to answer your question, but I will. The reason I would not like to is that I think it's unfortunate if someone like me tells you why I do what I do, because I think the work may work in the way I want it to, but it also may work in other ways. And if I close it, like put a lid on it by saying I do it for this reason, it may stop you from what happened to you. And that's, you see, whatever happened to you when you watch the work is more real than what I think should happen to you. Because if what I think should happen to you didn't happen, then that doesn't matter what I think, if you see what I mean. But it doesn't mean that I don't think about what I do. I sometimes think about what I do. And one of the things that's very important for me living in South Africa is that we have a media apparatus which is constantly creating a set of images of black people suffering, which totally dehumanizes them. It doesn't allow you to see them as human beings and as people. It just, you see this kind of black mass of suffering mass, and they're seen as the Africans and the African condition. And my experience of people in South Africa is not like that. I've never yet met anybody who is not a sovereign, autonomous being who may have suffered or may not have suffered, but so-called black people don't suffer any more than so-called white people. But when you always represent them a certain way, then they become that. So I was interested in trying to find ways of putting an individual's humanity into those images, so that the viewer will experience not the collective imagery, but actually their own identity as an individual coming through those images, and have a much deeper relationship on a one-to-one basis than just this blanket suffering black, suffering African, which I find actually very rude and very disheartening, that is still the way people are being represented, despite, in our case, 20 years of so-called democracy, which has got us into a situation now even worse than we were 20 years ago. Because in 1976 and in 1961, when you had the Sharpeville and Soweto massacres, the whole world could rally around oppressed South Africans and say the government is wrong and you must change it. But now, because people vote for their oppression and because people have voted for the government that kills them, Europeans have nothing to say. Democracy is killing people now with R5 rifles, blowing them up. And democracy is supposed to be the thing we've all fought for. So we're in a terrible situation. It's a cul-de-sac. Politics as we know them are a dead end in South Africa. And I think in many countries of the world, the existing political spectrum is too narrow for the reality that we live in. And we have to invent a new kind of politics, which, for me, cinema is where I do my invention. You know, I retreated completely from voting. I never voted in my whole life, not once. But I retreated even from imagining that going once every 4 years and putting a cross on paper can do anything useful for anybody. I just don't believe it. I really don't believe it. I'm very much against democracy. It's a disaster.
Anybody else? Would you like to say a few words about your writing, about your poetry, or your novels?
No.
Okay. All right, but you know, there is poetry, there is novels, and of course there's music. I think we should wrap it. Thank you very much for coming.